Denise Redeker not only survived a life-saving heart transplant, after recovering, she founded the Heartfelt Help Foundation. Through her personal journey and commitment to helping others, Denise addresses the critical yet overlooked challenge of post-transplant housing costs, particularly in high-priced areas like Silicon Valley and San Francisco.
Thank you so much, Denise Redeker, for joining me here today in AwareNow to share this space and to share your story. Thank you.
Thank you for asking me to be a part of it. I just so appreciate what you guys do as well.
Well, thank you so much. Let's start like this. First of all, can you share about your personal journey as a heart transplant recipient and what it is that inspired you to establish the Heartfelt Help Foundation?
Well, thank you. I received my second chance at life in January of 2018. I like to say I'm 6 years old, which means I'm in first grade now. and sometimes I act like it. But going through the desperate need for transplant, facing death, actually dying a couple of times, and being brought back gives you a new perspective on what's important and what's not. And most stuff isn't important. And it also gives you a perspective and a sense of empathy on what other people are going through, what other people have to face, the challenges they have to face, whether it's in or out of transplant. My personal story, my recovery from transplant was incredibly difficult. I went through both types of organ rejection. I had 3 open heart surgeries in the span of a week. I had, as I said, organ rejection. I had a hospital-acquired infection. I spent 4 months in the hospital post-transplant. And I think when you go through all of that and then you have to relocate, I live about 2.5 hours north of my transplant facility. And so we were one of the ones who had to relocate to Silicon Valley for a period of time after my transplant. For me personally, it was almost 4 months. And we are bluntly very privileged. As a family, we're very lucky. We're solidly middle class. We have a community that, without us even asking, saw that we were facing expenses that were going to be hard for us to meet and chipped in and held fundraisers for us and were incredibly generous to us. And that got us thinking, A, about how lucky we were, but B, what happens when people don't have community, when they're coming into this without a job, without insurance, without family to support them, without, bluntly, money. Because in this country, unfortunately, that's what you need. And I was still in the process of recovering, so these thoughts are swirling around in our head, but we really didn't know what to do with it until the following year when I happened to overhear a conversation when I was in a hospital setting and heard a conversation about a gentleman, later found out a patient who was awaiting transplant in the hospital, much like I had the year prior, and was going to be pushed back on the waiting list for transplant because he didn't have the funds to pay for post-transplant housing. He was going to be told to go home and start a GoFundMe or have a bake sale in order to raise those funds. And it, quite frankly, made me angry. I just thought something as solvable as money should not be denying this person, whoever this person is, their second chance. And I vowed to go home and do something about it. I didn't know what really at the time, and I just kind of threw together a fundraiser in my backyard And we raised $12,000 that we were able to fund that particular patient's post-transplant housing in full and have some left over for the next patient. That kind of got the ball rolling. I sat down that holiday season with my family and said, I think this is kind of what I'm meant to do. And I think this is what I want to do. And so we started doing our due diligence and filed for our 501c3 paperwork right after the first of the year in 2020, and then 2020 happened. And I thought we were probably not going to get our 501c3 paperwork processed because the government had bigger fish to fry in 2020 than processing a small family-run 501c3 paperwork. But doing that due diligence was super helpful for me because I learned about families who were choosing to live in their car for their post-transplant housing because they couldn't afford a hotel. Families who were choosing because they felt like they had no other choice to live in rundown, not properly equipped hotels because they felt like they had no other choice. They had to stay close to the hospital, and they couldn't afford to stay in a clean, safe, well appointed hotel room or a apartment building. And that just made me more and more determined that we could do something about it. There was no one else, there still is to this day, no one else in Northern California providing post-transplant housing to anybody. And we're the only ones who are doing this kind of work. And so in the fall of 2020, we actually finally got our 501c3 processed, and we hit the ground running. And as of today, we've been able to fully fund 31. We just accepted our 31st patient, 31 patients post-transplant housing in full, unless they had some sort of insurance that contributed to it, and then we paid what the insurance didn't cover.
So the specific challenges and difficulties that heart transplant recipients and their families face regarding post-transplant housing, certainly Silicon Valley, San Francisco, it's expensive anyway. So outside of expense, is there just like an availability issue too in terms of like what's actually available at any rate? Does that play into it as well?
Absolutely. You have to understand and remember, and most people don't even realize this, is that when transplant patients in general, but heart and lung and some other transplant patients more specifically, when we're initially discharged from the hospital into post-transplant housing, we are as immunosuppressed as you can possibly be. The doctors have worked to pretty much remove our immune system so that our body doesn't reject our new organ. Because for the rest of our lives as transplant patients, our body is going to see our donated organ as a foreign invader. And left to their own devices without immunosuppressant medication, our body would attack and try and kill our donated organ. It never is, with very few exceptions in the liver transplant arena, it is never going to see my heart, my new heart, for example, as part of my own body. If I stop taking my immunosuppressants tomorrow, even 6 years after my transplant, I would go into rejection and most likely die. So as a severely immunocompromised patient, especially when you're initially discharged from the hospital, you need a particular type of housing in order to be safe. You need to not be in group housing because obviously if you're with a bunch of other people who maybe are not taking your immunosuppression as seriously as you are, then you're putting yourself at risk. You need to have a place that has a kitchen, because you need to be able to cook your own healthy meals as you begin your recovery. You need space. And that limits the availability. That means that your average hotel room may not be the right place for you. It means that a communal living house where there are multiple families in one place at the same time may not be the right place for you. For pediatric patients that we work with, their options are things like the Ronald McDonald House, which is a fantastic organization and was designed for pediatric cancer patients who are immunosuppressed, but not as immunosuppressed as a transplant recipient is. And we've had pediatric patients and their families come to us because they've gotten sick at the Ronald McDonald House and they've had to be readmitted to the hospital. And then their team is saying, well, can you do something else? Is there something else you can do? And then they find us either through their social worker or on their own. And we're able to put them in clean, safe, near hospital housing that has a kitchen that is specifically tailored to the needs of a particular family, because transplant doesn't happen in a vacuum. Your life still goes on. You've still got expenses at home. You've got your family at home. And if you're a young mom, say, who just received her heart transplant, you need a space that's tailored for your family to be with you, your children, your babies to be with you. If you are a pediatric patient, you need a space that has a couple of bedrooms so that your child can be in a space and you can be in another space, so that you're sleeping comfortably and in a proper environment for you. If you're a young adult and your caregivers are your parents, that's a different kind of lodging situation. So what we want to do as Heartfelt Help Foundation is we want to treat the patients as individuals, not as medical record numbers, and look at them as the whole person and the whole family and the whole group that they are, because they are. They are people first, and they come with their own unique family situations, and honoring that leaves them feeling seen and heard and understood, which is vitally important and valued, especially valued. Because so much of this is just kind of dehumanizing. You go through this whole thing and it's all about what your labs look like and titrating medications to what your blood pressure looks like and what your labs are looking like. And so much of it is just about what your body's doing, but not really who you are. And separating those two things and honoring those two things and valuing the difference between them is part and parcel of what we do here at Heartfelt Help Foundation.
So beyond financial assistance, what other types of support does a Heartfelt Help Foundation offer, both to heart transplant recipients, but their families as well?
Well, I think I kind of touched on one of them, and that is that we value the family. It's not just a patient that goes through this. It wasn't just me that went through the heart transplant. Yes, I was the one who actually physically had the heart transplant. I had my own trauma, but there is something unique about a caregiver trauma. It's minimized a lot. Parent trauma, caregiver trauma, because that caregiver has sat by a bedside and watched helplessly as their loved one, their child, their spouse, their partner, their parent, their sister, whoever, has come as close to death as you can get and come back. And so caring for them as well as the patient is, I think, part and parcel of kind of what we do here. But we also provide a mentoring service. When I went through my own transplant 6 years ago, the only resources I had were hospital support groups. And quite frankly, they were full of elderly, mostly men. And they weren't the resources I needed. They weren't living the life post-transplant that I wanted to live. They weren't doing the things that I wanted to do post-transplant. And I needed something different. And what I needed wasn't available to me. I needed to see someone who was doing this post-transplant life well. I needed to see someone who was accomplishing physical things that I hadn't been able to do for myself pre-transplant. And I needed to feel like, I needed to feel like there was hope, quite bluntly. I just needed hope. And I wasn't getting that in the resources that I had available to me locally. And so 6 years ago, I basically stalked a couple people online that were living the life that I thought I would wanted to live, and forced them to be my friends in real life. And luckily, this is a very small community, and we support each other beautifully. And both of them said that they would absolutely help and walk me through this process. And I realized then how valuable it was to have somebody ahead of you. And I think that's true in a lot of aspects of life, that having somebody who's about 4 steps ahead of you in whatever adventure you're going through is very helpful for setting goals, for realizing that you can get through all the hard things and see a better future, a better tomorrow on the other side. And so I really strive personally to be that person for every family that we work with.
In your experience with the Heartfelt Help Foundation, what have been some of the most impactful stories or moments that highlight the significance of this work, this incredible work that you're doing? Can you share just one story, perhaps?
Oh gosh, they're all every single one of the patients we've worked with has changed my life, and made me more empathetic, and made me more proud to be a part of the human community, to be a part of this transplant community. The good that is in these people who are fighting to get to the other side of this adventure with transplant, fighting to survive it, is inspiring to me on a daily basis. The concept of organ donation and transplant is a miracle and a gift. And it shouldn't also come with the worry and the stress of whether or not you're going to have to choose between putting food on the table and supporting your family, your child, your spouse in their post-transplant housing. But to tell you kind of a specific story, so many. I'll tell you a little bit about one of the pediatric patients we worked with. This little girl, her name's Armani, and she received her transplant, I believe, at about 18 months old. I may have the months off a little bit. She was teeny tiny. I went to go visit her in the hospital multiple times after her mom and I connected and became friends. This little girl, in her short little life, and she's a little bit over 2 now, has had strokes, has had a heart transplant, has gone through more in 2 years of life than most of us go through in 50 or 60 or 70 years of life. She's relearning. She's after 341 days in the hospital, was discharged to post-transplant housing. So most of her little life she spent in the hospital. And if you watch this little girl today, she is the happiest child. She is a constant smile, a constant joy. Her mom is a hero to me. Her mom is studying to be a nurse, and every day at her daughter's bedside would take her classes online and keep up with her schoolwork online while she was advocating for her daughter, while she was caring for her daughter, while she was making stuff happen at the hospital to make sure that her daughter had the best chance of survival. And now, post-transplant, she's home and out of post-transplant housing that we were able to provide for her family. But she's still advocating for this precious little girl who is the most smiley, sweet child on the planet, as this child is struggling to learn to walk and learn to talk and eat and do all of the things that kids should be doing at this age, and going through intense and I'm sure grueling physical therapy, as she's smiling the whole way and just is as happy as you can imagine. And watching this child every day is kind of like my inspiration. When things get hard, we're having trouble raising money, we're struggling to figure out where the next best thing is for the foundation to move in. I look at her and I see the videos her mom has sent me or posted on her Instagram page. And I see this girl struggling, but there's no sense of struggle. There's no visual, like you can't see that she's struggling. You know, because you're a grown-up, that this is hard. This is hard stuff that this little girl is being asked to do. And yet you don't see it on her face at all. You see joy on her face. And this is why there's organ donation. This is why we do what we do, is because we see this joy that's on the other side of this. And that despite the struggle, and as hard as it can be, as hard as everyday life can be sometimes, no matter what you're facing, joy is a choice. And you can still choose joy and have tears running down your face. And you can still choose joy and be in the middle of one of your hardest times. And this little girl reminds me of that every single day. And she's my inspiration. She will never know it. Her mom probably doesn't know it, but this child is my inspiration every single day.
Thank you so much for sharing that story, for sharing your whole story. Thank you for the work that you do, Denise. Thank you. Thank you for helping all of us become a bit more aware now. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.